Good evening, everybody. We are here to talk about Buddhadeb Dasgupta, the great filmmaker. This would be his 78th birth anniversary. He passed away last year. We have with us his daughters, Alokananda Dasgupta, the composer of films like AK vs. AK and web series such as Sacred Games. And she also composed music for 4 films, I think, of Buddhadeb Da.
Five, yeah, four,
Five,
yeah.
4 or 5, yeah. And we have his daughter Rajeshwari Dasgupta Ghosh, who's a lyricist, and she wrote a bunch of songs for Alokananda. The topic of the day, of the evening actually, the Buddhadeb Dasgupta, the man behind the cinema. The idea is to not talk about it films as much as we want to talk about what Buddhadeb Da was like in his day-to-day life, and he was also a poet. So the kind of poetry he was into, the kind of music he was into, what went behind the films that he wrote and directed. So Alokananda and Rajeshwari will introduce us to that aspect of Buddhadeb Da. I want to, in 2020, November 2020, a while before Anwar Ka Ajab Kissa was coming out, I had interviewed Buddhadeb Da, and he was generous enough to give me like an hour of his time while he was ill. Um, it was a good conversation, and he said a bunch of things about what he is like, which shows a lot in his films, which are very individualistic in nature. I want to ask Alokananda about some of the things he told me. So, hi Alokananda.
Hello, hi,
Hi, hi,
hi,
hi.
Devarsi. Thank you so much for having us.
So in his films, I pointed out that his characters are very whimsical, and they are very absorbed in their own world. And so when I asked him that, he said that this is what he said exactly. The quote was, I like people who are not materialistic, who are emotional and sensitive, who get lost while talking. I don't like people who are too practical, who figure things out quickly. The images and characters of my films are extremely internal and personal. That is what he said. So, can you tell me about that aspect of Buddhadeb? I mean, what does he mean by this?
Well, first of all, it's a very difficult time for us to even talk about him on his birthday. It's his first birthday without him. 70, what could have been a 78th birthday. So it's really difficult, but we try to think about these memories, and that keeps us going. So yes, I mean, there was so much more of the man behind the cinema, behind the camera. There was a lot of him behind the camera, and just like you said, just like in your quotation, a lot of him were in his characters. A lot of him were his characters, actually. A lot of him were his themes. So whimsical, yes, he talked about this thing that he coined as extended reality, a place between reality and non-reality, unreality, whatever you call it. So yes, there's a lot of abstract, whimsical, spontaneity, passion. Basically, it stems from passion. It stems from impulse and passion. So that is what I think he means. And in terms of impulse and passion, he was exactly like that in real life. Things that drove him, and it really reflects in his cinema again and again. So some of the funny things, or some of the, yes, the main thing that comes to my mind is his passion for food. So if he weren't a filmmaker, my sister would agree, if he weren't a filmmaker, he would have been a chef. So his passion from food was not just a typical Bengali foodie. His passion from food was almost scientific and obsessive, sort of, batshit crazy Edgar Allan Poe kind of dark things. I mean, his thinking of his recipes and the way he would think about food was very different from the way other people think about food, and that showed in his films as well. he had a lot of humility about food. In his last film Urojahaj, one of the ghosts says that, আমি তো শুধু ভাতের স্বপ্ন দেখি, অনেক স্বপ্ন দেখি. So he was very humble. There was nothing posh about his food taste. It was just passion. So wherever we would go, my mother Kuntara Dasgupta, my sister Rajeshwari, and my father, they would always start talking about food. And I wasn't that much into it then. So at breakfast, there would be conversation about lunch about dinner. And he would, wherever we went, he would stop the car and look at shops, and immediately, so his recipes were like his subplots. It's a metaphor for his plots and subplots. And his recipes were bizarre, and some of them really didn't work. He fed omelette to my husband Craig for breakfast. He liked to make breakfast for him every day. And he made omelette, and he made sure he stared at Craig's face to see what his reaction was. And my husband is American, so he's not used to somebody staring at him while he's eating. My father would stare at him while he would eat and keep asking questions and ask him to guess what he might have put. And the way he would pose these questions were very, I know I sound abstract, but very similar to how he talks about his films. So he one of his mystery ingredient was isabgul. So he mixed isabgul in the omelette, and he was discussing the connection of that and the good things and bad things about that. So if you can think of his mind as a nucleus and lots of things circulating, different items of food were like different images from his movie, different reflection of himself that he wanted to gather. Sometimes he didn't know what to do with them, just like it shows at times. He has too much of everything, and then he has to, he always told me to, you must make music like a chef. You must learn how to hold back. So yes, yes, the food and yoga, he was very passionate about yoga, and he wasn't spiritual, but he talked a lot about that. So I remember, he was always so active. So a lot of physical exercise and yoga. My sister and I tried our best to follow suit, but we couldn't catch up with the man even till the end. So my sister can vouch for that, basically. Yes.
Right. I have a question based on what you just said. Was he a mischievous person? Because you just said he put isabgul in omelette. I mean, that sounds like a prank. So was he mischievous?
Yes, he was, especially towards my brother-in-law, Arjun Ghosh. So my brother-in-law used to pull these pranks on him, and each time he made a complete fool of my father, as in my father completely fell for the trap. And so there began this competition and this war where my father wanted to get back at him. And he would tell me, so speaking of isabgul, he made a cocktail in a cocktail glass. He put isabgul with water with a umbrella and cocktail glass, and served it to my brother-in-law Arjun, who was saying that this is a brilliant cocktail I've come up with. And he wanted to pull that prank, but my brother-in-law was too clever for that. I think he figured it out. So that was one thing. He liked pranks, and he just liked humor. Basically, humor was all at the tip of his tongue. So
I have this question written down. So on the one hand, he used to write poetry, and his films are pretty quiet. They are not really loud and boisterous. His films are quiet, and he used to write poetry. And he told me, and he told many other people in other interviews, that he always tried to make his films close to poetry. So that gives the perception that he was an introverted person, but at the same time, he was very clearly fond of people around himself. I mean, he was the chairman of SRFI. I mean, he has to meet a lot of people all the time, and he's a director, so he has to meet a lot of. So what was he? Was he an introvert? Was he an extrovert? Did he sometimes retire into himself, away from people, and stay in his space, and sometimes just go out and meet a lot of people? Was it a polar opposite kind of a thing?
I think my sister can answer that.
Yeah, I know. Basically, definitely, he was a loner, and he was a deep introvert. But because his creative pursuit took him to places, he was essentially the black sheep of the family, having had a very humble background, and Bengali being the ruling language. And then he mastered English, he went abroad, he spoke to people, he attended festivals. So in a very interesting way, he was a loner to most of the people who he really wasn't so close to, but in his creative world, his films, his festivals, his festival friends, he was very flamboyant when it came to socializing.
Hmm.
I think it was a mix of both, but essentially he was a deep loner, and he always said, um, unless you're sad, you can't write poetry.
That might be true. I mean, I understand that that creative instinct. I mean, the need for some kind of dissatisfaction with the world, exactly, not sadness, which is why we're trying to create, make it beautiful. So, what are the things that made him dissatisfied or made him sad? Did, in his conversations, did he bring up things that he did not like about the world or made him sad, as you say?
Well, I'll start on this topic. Well, quite naturally, he was the real deal. There was nothing fake about it. The streak of genius, and it's all related. The world of art is related. You cannot be a poet and not be fascinated by art and all of that. And you cannot be a poet and filmmaker. I mean, it's a bold statement to make, but I believe you cannot be into the world of arts deeply if you're not overtly sensitive. Uh,
Hmm.
Rather slightly more sensitive than some other people. And it's not a discrimination, but there is this extended form of heightened, which you'll understand. I'm sure you understand what I'm talking about, a heightened form of sensitivity.
Yeah, yeah.
And it
Hmm.
stems from an existentialism doesn't have to be brought in. It comes naturally over time with revolution, with Naxal movements, and with poetry, and with everything existed, with Eliot, with Jivanananda Das, everything. The existentialism was there, and by definition, you're never satisfied, in life, and there's always this gap. And of course, he was very, very impacted by what was going on in the world. He was very much against violence and any kind of political violence of any sorts. He had a very open mind, and he had sort of this John Lennon's Imagine, sort of had it was rather utopian. He had he wished for a perfect world. So he was he was very much into news. He didn't bury his face under the sand ever till the end. So he was very active, and till the very end, everything bothered him. I mean, everything that is wrong with the world, there is a lot that is wrong with the world. So it
Hmm.
bothered him, and it came up in his conversation, and it came up with things that he can identify with the most, which is poverty, hunger, all of this. Yes.
So, I have a very simple question. So, when we had spoken, one thing that I mean, I connected with his films and with him on multiple levels. So, one particular thing was that he and I had a similar childhood. I was born in Kharagpur and in a railway colony. So we understood the environment, the multicultural environment, far away from the city, in a mofussil place and all that. And we connected with the city environment, when we turned, both of us, when we turned 18, 19. That is when he came to Calcutta to study, and right around the time Naxalism was at its peak. So he told me that he did not like living in the city. He did not like city much, but I love cities. I want to understand, but he did not like cities, but he lived in a city. So I want to understand what would he say about day-to-day life in the city? Would he be cranky? Would he complain? Would he long to go back to, North Bengal, or back where he was, he used to live nearby to the hills? Would he talk about all these things?
Yes, mainly spoke of his childhood and his early days when my sister was about to be born and all of that. He spoke of the past a lot, nostalgia and romanticization and romanticism as a whole. So I remember one of my conversations with him towards the end was about him expressing his disillusionment about modern times in relation to children. And I remember him telling me that I feel very sorry for the children, for kids of today, because they don't know what nature is, and they don't know what it is to play with nature. They don't know that, and I feel really sorry for them. So he always spoke about Choti Moti Pipra Boti, or his red. These are all moments from his childhood. There's those red bugs, his fascination for the ocean, which we see in many of his movies, hills and nature. Of course, there was a huge desire for silence and nature, silence in nature all the time. He wanted to retreat into his favorite world. But having said that, he also had that side of him, which my sister spoke about, the flamboyance, and knew that he had to socialize in his own niche crowd of cinema and filmmaking. So that's why living in the city was an option for him. But I think you're right. If he had a choice, if he ever had a choice, he would have lived far from the madding crowd, sort of.
Right. One thing is that from what I've read from your interviews and what I've known from having spoken to you, so he was a very opinionated, individualistic man. That is the basic thing, which means he's a very opinionated and individualistic father, much like, say, Amir Khan from Dangal. Now, when Dangal came out, there was this discussion that, okay, on the one hand, okay, he's a great father, he's doing a great thing for, feminism. He's making these two girls go to wrestle and everything, and that is why they became very successful. But on the other hand, there was this complaint that he stole their childhood and did not make them, whatever and all that. So he was a huge influence to both of you, introduced you to music and films and all of that. I mean, for example, for many of us, at least for me, I discovered films and music, most of it on my own. So I was free there. I mean, there was no oppressive kind of umbrella, on myself. But that wasn't the case with you. So I want to understand about your childhood, your teens, when you have this giant in the house and he's telling you what to watch, what to listen. What was that like?
I'll start, and Rajeshwari, you can pick it up from there. So his influence was a very organic and natural thing. I don't think he had to try to influence us. He was 24/7 always influencing us without having to. So there was always, and my mother also played a lot of, she was Rajni Kantashan's granddaughter. So she had a lot of music playing in the house. So Baba's films, music playing. So there was no conscious, it wasn't consciously told. It was from the very beginning with dance and everything. It was just there. And of course, genes, interest, environment, heredity versus environment, everything. We were brought up in that atmosphere. So he didn't have to try too hard. But yes, he did try very hard for us to become classical pianists, which is akin to, the Indian gharana of music, or which is akin to what is in Dangal, where you want somebody to do, where you want your children to do something which they are actually not capable of. So in trying to make them do that, it is, the process is not good. So in that light, I believe there is a similarity between that Dangal parent. So he wanted us to be concert pianists. And however, that didn't happen because we were not concert pianists. My sister was a far better pianist than I was. I had, the nerves got the better of me. But then again, he was wise enough to give us the gift and then set us free to discover it on our own. So I found the path automatically. So yeah, my sister can take over from now.
Yeah, but Devarsi, just to correct, I mean, just to say what you just mentioned about the giant being in the house. For us, the giant was our father. So we never really saw him as this giant presence. We just knew that he's a exceptionally talented person who makes movies and is very strict about us watching Chitrahar and all those stuff. We couldn't even think of watching that. So that part I just wanted to clarify. secondly, yes, the piano thing was that we had no choice about it. So that's the bit where the dangle part comes in. But later, as my sister took it and studied music in the future, I couldn't, unfortunately. But um, it was a great base because we both can more or less sing, and we have a fine sense of music, rhythm, which I think learning piano from such a young age helped us. Um and he was very, very strict about not about studies actually, but about an extracurricular, which essentially was piano.
Right, right. I also want to understand something. I mean, this entire thing of an extracurricular artistic activity like learning song, dance, etc., is a very Bengali middle class, upper middle class thing. We've all faced it. I understand also based on what Alokananda told me previously that he was very interested in Western classical music as opposed to Hindustani or Rabindra Sangeet and all that. Why? I mean, why that and not the other kinds of music or other kinds of art? Again, question for both of
Well, I wouldn't know why, but he he um, he just, I think he discovered, unlike us, he discovered, like you, Western classical himself through movies, through films. I think in Rashomon he heard Bolero, Maurice Ravel's Bolero, for the first time in a screening way back in the 70s or 80s, somewhere in Cannes or something. So and he also watched the dance, the ballet. A long time back. So for a person coming from a village, he could associate Chow dance with the ballet. So basically, he didn't shun Indian music. He was very much about the music of the earth and folk music, but he always had an exceptional understanding and exceptionally sensitive, overtly sensitive to Western classical movement. It would move him to tears. And he would spend hours alone with our vinyls and records back then and listen to, Tchaikovsky and a lot of that. And like I said, it was already there. I don't know why it was there, but it was there. And there was something about him and piano, being able to play the piano, that was very obsessive. I don't know where he got that, but he always had that, this desire. Maybe he wanted to learn it himself and he couldn't.
No,
He
he told
wanted
us he wanted to, and of course, he couldn't afford one. And so,
Yes,
every
exactly.
parent's desire is what they couldn't achieve. They usually want their kids to take in the path. So, and also he was a voracious reader, and he spent his early college days around Calcutta University, and of course, that book lane. Um,
you.
so he would pick up any book on music, and just because he doesn't have access to a particular instrument didn't stop him from reading about it. And as my sister correctly mentioned, that all these movies that he was exposed to had the background score, which I think was another character to the movie that essentially drew him towards Western classical.
Right, right. Now, as you said, Rajeshwari, that he wasn't particularly fond of Chitrahar. Now, I understand a certain generation of Bengalis all across, at least in Calcutta, they were snobbish about Hindi films or Bollywood. But then Alokananda goes and joins Amit Trivedi and starts, making music for all sorts of Hindi films. And you, Rajeshwari, start writing lyrics. How did Buddhadeb Da take it, and what was his initial opinions on it? That my daughters are making music for Bombay movies. So what was that like?
Um, if I can take this first, you can join in. So because my sister studied music, I mean, she studied musicology, so it was quite certain that she would pursue a career on it. And when she came to Bombay to assist Amit Trivedi also was belonged to a genre which was not a typical, very Bollywoodish music with a lot of jhankar beats and everything that we grew up
Hmm.
with. So
Hmm.
we had exposed him to that, what kind of music he makes, and he was not a big, huge name that time.
Hmm.
So my father respected the fact that she essentially is assisting him because she enjoys the work he does and not because he's a name. And with me, it was actually quite interesting because he used to always be completely baffled as to how I can write in Hindi. And he would always tell me that, how are you writing in Hindi? Because for us, my spoken Hindi is atrocious, but my writing
Say the
Hindi,
least.
yeah,
Yes.
my writing Hindi kind of compensates for that. So he would be like, my daughter, I expected probably for you to write poetry in Bengali, which I do. But how did you come up with writing in Hindi? He used to take pride in it, but that used to completely baffle him.
Hindi and Urdu both.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would take this, I would kind of twist your question a little bit and sort of talk about the fact that in certain areas, I do think his guidance was incorrect, if I may use the word, because he was biased, plain and simple. He was biased. He was biased and he had a prejudice against anything where melody wasn't Khoya Khoya Chand like or Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata like. Anything that wasn't that, anything with electronica, anything with lyrics of Bollywood films of the, the 90s songs, right? The lyrics and the songs and all of that. So he did not try. There's one thing I have to say about him, that he did not try to listen to it. He just had a very big bias. No, you're not listening to this kind of music. You're listening to this kind of music. And it was us who my sister obviously and me more, who kind of took, like I said, took the guidance and did my own thing with it. So it was us who discovered all kinds of music, listened to all kinds of Bollywood music. There was, you can deny all you want that you hate Bollywood music, but we grew up with it. We secretly listened to it, secretly watched movies. So that's why I believe our taste became much more eclectic overall, and which the topic that we are going to come to soon. And then we started to introduce him to the change of times and the change of music. And I think his prejudice changed. I think he broke out of that mold. You have to listen to something very much to be able to say that you hate it. Why do you hate it? So I think he
That is
had
true.
that epiphany towards the end of his life, that there's no reason to hate it because it's Bollywood. It's actually an interesting track, whether it's Bollywood or not. It's a song, it's music after all. So all that happened mainly because of us. So it almost like the whole circle. The first half was him uh, exposing us. The second half was us exposing him to our world.
Right, right. I have a question for Rajeshwari. The same question that her father used to ask. How can you write so well in Hindi? I mean, how did you learn it? Did you read Hindi poetry, Urdu poetry? What happened?
Yeah, I read a lot of Urdu poetry. I've been always a fan of Rumi, and I mean, essentially not Urdu, but I've read his translated work, and I've read a lot of Gulzar Saab's work. And I mean, I was discussing with my sister the other day that since we were kids and having been born and brought up in Kolkata, we actually don't have that one day where we can go back to and say that that day we learned how to understand Hindi. We always grew up watching these. Every Saturday there used to be an Hindi film, and we understood, right? There was not a single day and single person who handheld us and told us this is Hindi, this is how you talk. Even how broken and how gibberish it sounded, we all kind of grew up as if Hindi was our third language and we all knew it. And of course, in school, we were introduced to Devanagari script, and Sanskrit I learned for a few years. And Hindi was, it became a way of life. I mean, it was always there. And of course, because I was passionate about writing, I corrected my Aki Matra and Unki Matra, which in Hindi is extremely gender conscious language, unlike Bengali. So that is the part I still kind of stumble onto sometimes, but I don't know, it just comes to me, I guess.
Right, right.
I'll just interrupt here and tell you a funny story. So yes, so my sister was always a writer. So my father, she used to write from a very young age on Bengali and English. So of course, my father was very surprised how she wrote in Hindi, but he could tell that she has a love for writing in general, and she can express it equally in Hindi language. But a funny story is when we were young, that time of 80s and all, where it was like, speak in Bengali, ato English pa na mane, speak in Bengali, speak in your mother tongue. So we had Hindi as our third language. So the only thing that I ever failed in school was Hindi paper. And I came home in tears and showed him my answering papers sheet, thick sheet, and it had a red mark, 44, 45 was a pass mark. And he never really bothered or told us anything about our education or never really scolded us. But I still thought he would be very disappointed. He looked at it and the first thing he said, এত হিন্দি লিখেছিস বাহ কি দারুণ, like you wrote so much Hindi. So it was a big deal for him to know that my daughters can write Hindi and can, and so when Rajeshwari started writing my songs, even I was really shocked that she's able to use her, poetic, all her rhetorics and metaphors in Hindi equally with the nuances of enunciation and hook words which are used in Hindi movies. My father actually really started to, so that bias started to change, because he knew that if my daughters are doing something in Bollywood, it can never be what he used to dislike. We don't belong to that school of thought. It'll always be something which is, which is the space we went in, or I went in anyway, sort of in between. So yeah, this is just a funny story I thought I'll bring up.
Right. I want to ask you about now. I know roughly what Aloka's music taste is like, because we have talked about music in, I think, 3-4 interviews already. So I know you love Massive Attack. I know you love the score for that Jim Jarmusch movie with Johnny Depp, that acid western movie. And so you love all these things, and you are making music for Sacred Games and all that. You love Nine Inch Nails. And I'm sure you are listening to all this and making all this music, and you are introducing them to your father, like, this is what I'm doing, or this is what I'm listening to. So what was that like? I mean, we all do that. I mean, my father is from a different generation. I show him this is what is being made. I showed him Sacred Games, for example, and he was amazed that Hindi, Bollywood is doing all these things. So what was like that like, and did he like what you introduced to him, and what were his opinions on that?
So this was a long journey where I, slowly when I'm also highly introverted. I became very into personally discovering music. Sort of, I also like to be alone in my space, and discovered a lot of music on my own. And the joy of discovering music on your own, and you almost feel like you'll burst if you don't share it with someone. So it was so overwhelming during my, and this was before YouTube. So we couldn't really, there's still a time where we had to touch DVDs by hand and go to Goriat Market. My Beatles albums were bought from Goriat Market, the cassettes, all of that. So so yeah, so as and when my music taste grew, developed, morphed, mutated, whatever you call it, I increasingly became interested in a genre of music which I was sure that my father would shun. I had no question about it. This I thought that there is no way, there is no chance, because I was astring from melody. The reason why my thing is also very Western classical oriented, because it's a melody and accompaniment. There is a lot of force or focus on melody. Slowly, when my taste moved away from just melody, more into bass and electronic and other things, experimentation of many other things, I was absolutely sure that my father is going to hate me now, and my music taste. He's only going to probably say that, what you're doing in Bombay, listening to music such as this, is this music? This is just noise. But I just had to share it with him. So there were many such incidents, but one of it is that I think last year or the year before, I don't remember, I had an incredible toothache, and it wasn't helping. So my husband put on a certain playlist on YouTube, and I had listened to the gentleman Mark Lanigan, his music, and had listened to Uncle, the band, separately also. I think it was in our algorithm, in our playlist on YouTube. And suddenly this song called Looking for the Rain, and Mark Lanigan's deep baritone voice, the piece starts with almost like a beginning of a Spanish bullfight, or a beginning of some kind of a Roman story. And then it goes to his baritone voice, and then the beat drops. It's a simple 1-2 march bass beat, and then something happened to me. My life changed. Really, I'm not exaggerating. This is not something I'm saying to sound whatever, but it just changed. And my husband, I told him, I forgive you for everything you might do in future or have done, because you introduced me to the song. So then we just kept on listening to it. And I remember there were times when my dad would ask me, what are you busy listening to? And I would tell him this, and he said, don't listen to these kind of things, you listen to Rabindra Sangit more. So I told him, you know what, I'm sending you this track. I'm tripping on it. I use the exact phrase. I'm tripping on it highly. I'm sending it to you. He would ask, what does trip on mean? It's just like, I'm tripping with or without any external agents. I'm tripping on it. So listen to it and tell me honestly. Wear your headphones so you can hear the bass. Listen to it right now and let me know. And I counted the minutes of the entire song. He actually listened to the entire song and got back to me with the exact same awe that I had. What is this voice? What is this baritone? Who is this man? What is he? And what is this beat? What is this bass? What is this darkness? It's really cool. And send me the song, Shuli. It's like, I have already sent it to you. Okay, send me something so I can download and listen to it while I do my yoga. Imagine Buddhadeb Dasgupta, who's only listened to Rabindra Sangit during yoga, or Buddha, sort of calming music, is listening to Mark Lanigan's Looking for Rain during his yoga. So that was one thing which immediately, because music was a common language in our family, immediately brought me that much closer to him, because I felt like he's understanding my mind at this, my current state of mind is this, and I can't really talk about it, whether it's blah, whether it's depression, whether it's dark, but I can express it only through what I'm listening. So he understood that. Same with 9-Inch Nails, Find My Way. So I was fighting with him about melody. That not all, because just because it's electronic doesn't mean it doesn't have melody. And I played Find My Way for him. And Find My Way has such a beautiful melody. It's and Baba loving 9-Inch Nails. So he listened to it. He kept it in his favorites in YouTube. And some of the mentions also Lord Royal. He would tell me, what are these? Who is Justin Bieber? And what are these displays? He actually told my sister and I, play me some songs like pop songs that people like. Do you guys like pop music? So we played him Royal from Lord by Lord. And he loved the melody. He said, there's something about it is very, and he cracked it. He said, because Royal has a very simple rhythm, it's got a very generic rhythm. So he's like, yeah, this rhythm is very generic, but the way the melody progresses is very cool. So he was saying the things that we are thinking, that I'm thinking. So, and this is a man who has never expressed any interest in, he used to love Pink Floyd, and thereby, of course, he was exposed to synth and, analog music, but he never expressed any interest in any of these things. And then came the song from BA Pass that my sister wrote called Shab, which was also an electronic song, which after listening, he just kept crying. He just bawled. And I thought he would yell at us saying that, why have you used such drums and all these things in the song? Why is it blah, blah, blah? But he just started crying, saying it's amazing. And he loved Gum from AK versus AK, which also my sister wrote, which was again a very, it's a poppy, sort of a very Billie Eilish poppy electronic stuff. It is not, it is poppy in a sense. And he said, I love that. I love the beat. I love how you use the word, how Rajeshwari has written Gum, and you've used that. So this unfortunately happened towards the end of his life. But I have to think of the good things. And this is one of the good things, that towards the end, when he was, really sick, we had conversations with music, play him something, he'll play something. And we really talked about these tracks and bonded with him. I never ever thought I would bond over, Massive Attack, Karma Coma. He loved the rap. He loved the rap. He said, this is something really cool because, when they use the words like, I dig in a hole, there's the scansion is different. And he's pointed that out too. Like, look, it's not just 4/4. They're doing something different. I really like it. And show me the video. And he could connect it with with Shining.
Yeah.
The video is all sort of linked to Shining. He connected
Mhm.
the world. So there was a big epiphany, aha moment that, okay, this father of ours who have told us our entire lives to, not listen to this kind of Bollywood or electronic or jing-jang music is actually into very strange. I mean, I wouldn't call this a normal, I mean, many people are into these songs, but it's not absolutely common. It's not poppy. It's not popular music. So it was very surprising, and my sister did the same. So yeah, these are some of the.
I want to talk about the songs that you mentioned before we go to your and Rajeshwari's work. One is that the Nine Inch Nails song "Find My Way" is a very natural song for him to like because it also has a good piano portion, which keeps returning in it. Also, with Karma Koma, wasn't he because he was very much into Shastriya song or Western Shastriya song, with basically classical music. What happens in Karma Koma is basically, and all the trip hop and hip hop is essentially sampling. And I think Karma Koma sampled some kind of a
Flute, classical
flute
Indian flute.
and some kind of dholak from some Hindi song or
Yeah,
something.
yeah, it is done.
Wasn't was
Touching.
wasn't he fascinated by these things?
Yes, yes, he was fascinated by the flute because the flute interval is not a regular Western flute in. There is that strange modulation in the flute. The flute is haunting and almost doesn't belong to it. So he mentioned this. I don't remember him mentioning the dholak and the rhythm, but he mentioned the flute. That what is, and he said things that we think of. You are immersed in this, Devarsi, so you know this, that things that we think about it, we keep on listening to Karma Kuma because we keep on expecting that flute part to come again and again in between the conversation. So he talked about the flute. He talked about and the video is rather graphic.
Yeah.
There
Hmm.
was no such bias in the video. He understood the video. He had comments on certain parts where he thought, okay, the guy didn't have to start saying 34, 34. He said that looks a little bit overacting, overdone. So he was analyzing the video for me and telling me about Shining. But I think a lot of what he liked about Karma Koma was the flute part. And I also, spoke a lot about Banksy and showed him Banksy, a lot of his work. And at that time, there was this rumor going on
Rumor
that,
that
yeah,
3D is Banksy. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So
And speaking of flute, sorry, I'm just remembering things. I think the one movie where there is a lot of flute in PDG's work is Kalpurush. I think that man
There's
and
a man
am
also.
I
Yeah.
wrong?
No, no,
That
you're
man,
right. There is a man with the Bashiwala basically.
Pashiwala. Yes, yes, yes. Right, right. Now I want to. You were saying something, Rajeshwari?
No, I think flute has been an intrinsic part of all his background scores. If you listen to Chora, if you go back to Tahadhir Pathan, Lal Dorja, flute has been essentially everywhere. That's what I
Right,
wanted to add.
right, right. Now I want to talk about your both of your music. So as I said, as I'm going back to the question I asked like 10 minutes ago. So you are making music in Bombay for BA Pass, AK versus AK, Trapped, and all these things. So when he's listening to them, for example, Ghoom from AK versus AK, it starts with a very thumping beat. Um, um, what would be his comments on it? What would be his reactions? What would he say?
I think he already did. So I had the fortune of introducing the song, like I said, and he already made a comment. His thought was, I mean, he loved Amit Trivedi singing, and he found that sort of another full circle, because I was working with Amit Trivedi, and now is Amit Trivedi singing for me in a song. So he thought, actually, he was very interested, to be honest, in the lyrics of Goom, because my sister sort of, I'll have a say, my sister wrote it in the style of Thikana Chai,
Sukumar Rai.
Sukumar Rai, Thikana Chai bolchi shono. So my father loved the way my sister wrote this kind of getting lost, Anil Kapoor trying to find someone and getting lost in the streets. The way she wrote the story, that is what something he was fascinated by, and he really liked Amit Trivedi's voice. And like I said, he told me this doom, this downbeat is really catchy. And I love that you use TikTok, and he was especially fascinated by the way one word was taken and highlighted. Just one small word, "gum," which is a single syllable, and most of the song was based on a single syllable. So he made these really constructive comments. Yeah.
Right. But the kind of music that you have done for your movies, or Nine Inch Nails or Karma Koma, as you said, is not pop exactly. There's a lot of intelligence and a lot of interesting stuff happening even in there. But did you also like very matcha type of music, like very like what we call in Bengali kaura? I don't know, like something stuff like that. Was you also into that? Because I know that you are into that. So was you also into
Rajeshwari. Yes.
So basically what happened was, when last few years when he was in and out of sickness and
Hold it closer to your mouth, please. Yeah.
almost relegated to the bed, we always would try to cheer him up in ways that we could think of. And then suddenly one day I told him, Baba, why don't you listen to this music? We really like it. And then he was like hoping for something really nice and really, sensitive music. And uh, we actually kind of, pranked him and made him listen to Tum Pashona. You've heard of that song, right? It's an immensely popular
Yeah.
song. And we were actually gauging his expressions, and he burst into complete laughter because he couldn't believe that a song like that could be composed and written. And there's an interesting anecdote to it. He was always fascinated by the wife running away. Like a bou palalo jalna diye. In Khera also the wife leaves. The wife literally runs away. In Lal Darja also the wife leaves. Am I missing out another movie? Uh,
Yeah.
in Kalpurush also technically
Kalpurush
the
also.
wife
Chorachor
left.
also. Chorachor.
Chorachor also the wife left with another man. So his this pattern of the wife suddenly basically
Taking off.
running away, taking off, fascinated him. I don't know why. Maybe that's why his wife took off before him in a crude joke. Um, so um, so yeah, so and the whole concept of Bo Palalo Jalna Diye on the wedding night, I mean, it just, he could identify with it like, oh my God, somebody could write this song of such a caliber, and he loved it. He listened to it in loops, and we also went crazy with it. And sometimes he probably towards the end found some meaning in such bizarre songs, and some, he probably had a conditioned mind which kind of opened up. It was like my sister said, kind of an epiphany. Maybe he thought that he doesn't have much time, so he probably conditioned his mind to absorb things which he had completely shunned himself away from. And Doyal Baba was also another interesting thing which I remember many years back. There was this song with a hilarious guy coming on stage and with a painted face, and he sings Doyal Baba Kola Khaba, and he has these very crude dancing steps, and
And
that into
lyrics.
again,
Yeah.
and lyrics, of course. I mean, lyrics with innuendos, with whatever. But uh, my dad found it extremely creative, extremely hilarious, and he was always fascinated by Jatra, right? In Fera also you see that entire Jatra thing happening, and that also was shot. Somebody just filmed it on a Jatra landscape, and that became hugely popular. So yeah, those two are both a quirky song, and since we are celebrating his birthday today, and everybody knows that he's always been a, he listens to Tagore, he listens to his poetry, but this side of him, I think, was kind of interesting, and he
A
also,
lot.
yeah,
Yeah.
sorry.
Sorry. You were saying something.
No, and also I think something that would completely get his goat is the song Moja Moja. I don't know what about him, what about the
The
song he
the
liked.
the Imtiaz Ali movie. That song.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes. So, and there were times when my kid was smaller, and I would kind of overhear my father putting him to sleep, or kind of, caressing his head or trying to put him to sleep, um, singing this song. So, Moja Moja kind of became a lullaby for him. And I couldn't imagine my dad singing Moja Moja and putting my child to sleep. So that was a very interesting side of him, which I feel was um, psychological as well as I don't know, it was quirky and psychological, and he probably knew that he has less time and he needs to open his mind to this kind of music, but he didn't force it. He truly enjoyed them.
Yeah, he genuinely did.
Yeah,
Yes.
he truly enjoyed them.
Right,
He
right.
tripped on it, and Tumpa is essentially a item number, which the concept behind it, the culture behind it, he shunned. I mean, we could not imagine. It was like blacklisted item number. But this, he realized that this is more than an item number. This is just how catchy and how quirky it is. And I remember he said, it would be interesting if he said, Toke Amar Kosam instead of Tujhe Meri Kasam. In the line, they say it in Hindi in one line. He said, Eta khub bhalo hoto jodi to Amar Kosam. So he was improvising with the song as he was stripping. And Doyal Baba, it was a bounty. He wanted a bounty hunter to track him down because he wanted him in his film. He has been on the lookout. I could not help him because I couldn't find him. I don't think I tried that hard either to go to his village, but my father wanted Doyal Baba. He wanted to ask him, he wanted to know, where did you learn how to dance like this? Who are you? What are you trying to say? Why have you mesmerized me? I'm such a big fan of you. Buddhadeb Dasgupta is a fan of Doyal Baba and he wanted him in his film. So that was the extent of eccentricity on Kyaura songs and Mojar Kyaura songs, basically.
To which I would like to add another interesting side of him. He was essentially a technician. I mean, he was a filmmaker, but he was a technician. He edited his films. He was a cinematographer in few of his films. So, being a technician, he was completely clueless about technology. So, technology always took him off guard, and he was overwhelmed by every time. YouTube was this cove of, it was treasure island for him because he obsessed with Madhubala, right? He always wanted to run away and marry her and have a life with her. But so every time I would suddenly he would hum a tune, and I know that he's humming a Madhubala tune, a song tune, and I would suddenly play that tune, and he'll be like, "Ki kore chalali?" And I'm like, I know the song. I just went to YouTube and I put it, and he's like, "My God, this is great." अरे ওই গানটা পারবি চালাতে? So it kind of totally blew his mind. Like whatever song he can think of, we can go to any channel, any YouTube or any other similar channels and just play it and play for him. So that was an interesting side of him that he always used to get baffled by how technology can bring the songs that he grew up with. Um, every time he wanted to hear, he could play.
Right.
I think we should end it here right now. And we should end it on this note that it's an interesting thing we are celebrating today. We are celebrating the quirky side of the man that only his near and dear ones know. So happy birthday. Thank you so much for having us.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. Thank you, Whitebird Trails. Thank you, Rajeshwari,
Thank you,
Aloka.
Whitebirdtrails.
Thank